Lamborghini has finally announced its replacement for the Aventador, which was getting rather long in the tooth and had gone through no shortage of iterations. The replacement is called the Revuelto, and being a Lamborghini owner, I thought I would give you my views, and add to the noise and cacophony of information floating around YouTube. But if you've got any thoughts on this replacement, do let me know that in the comments below. So let's start with the basic specifications, which you might already have heard ad nauseum. In short, the Revuelto has 4 engines. You've got the naturally aspirated V12 and 3 electronic engines, 1 in the back and 2 in the front. The 2 in the front help to give rise to torque vectoring, which helps with maneuverability, which is useful given how gargantuan these cars are. Now these engines give rise to a total output of around 1,000 horsepower, just a little bit over, Lamborghini clearly shooting to just get over 1,000 horsepower. But in general terms, it is going to be a fast car, going from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour, or 0 to 62 miles per hour in around 2.5 seconds, at least according to the official figures, but obviously journalists are going to road test that when it becomes officially available. Now that engine, or these engines rather, are matched with an 8-speed dual clutch automatic, which is probably a big improvement over the prior single clutch, although the prior single clutch did have quite a lot of character associated with it, and is similar to the transmission that I have in my old Gallardo, which is actually not as terrible as you'd think it would be, given there's a single clutch with flappy paddle gearbox. Now, that's what we've got in terms of the engines. The big issue, of course, is the dimensions for this car, and the car is not a light animal. The car weighs in at just over 1.7 tons, which is similar to what the Aventador was, although a little bit heavier. It's a much more hefty animal, given that we've got these additional electronic engines matched with the naturally aspirated V12. Although Lamborghini has tried to shave off some weight with reducing the weight of the engine, reducing the weight of the other components. The Revuelto is also a rather large animal, not just in terms of its weight, but also in terms of its dimensions. So for example, it's 2.266 meters across, just a little bit bigger than the outgoing Aventador, which is about 2.65 meters, including the mirrors. If you exclude the mirrors, it is obviously a little bit shorter, but that isn't really going to help you when you're driving around in narrow alleyways. In terms of length, well, the Revuelto is actually rather long. It's about 4.947 meters, as compared to the Aventador, which was 4.797, i.e. it's longer than the Aventador. Now these are both wider and longer than the Technica, which is relatively unsurprising because that's the V10 equivalent. However, what this tells you is the Revuelto, much like the Aventador, might be a little bit of a pain in inner city settings, particularly if you're trying to deal with small parking spots. However, in order to offset some of this, Lamborghini does have torque vectoring in order to improve maneuverability. That won't help you actually fit into a parking spot, but it might help you turn into it. Now the weight distribution is 44% front, 56% rear, which is what you would expect, similar to the Aventador. So that's what we've got with the tech specs. It's obviously an improvement over the Aventador, but it doesn't improve the core problem I have with it, which is the core reason I prefer the V10s, which is that it's just very, very large. I live in the inner city. It's just not really very convenient for me. I can't even park it in a lot of places, which is obviously an issue if you're actually trying to drive the car. Now in terms of whether it's good value for money, well, of course, the prices are all being settled at the moment, and in the US, you might ultimately end up paying over sticker, or outside of the United States, you might not be able to get an allocation. I haven't tried to express interest in this, A, because it is expensive, but also B, because I wouldn't be able to fit it into my parking spot, so it becomes a little bit of a pain. But in any case, whether it's good value for money, well, Lamborghini at the moment is managing supply. What this means is that demand is going to vastly outstrip supply for the moment, meaning that if you were to get in and secure your allocation, then it's likely it will hold value. Lamborghini will likely come up with infinite numbers of iterations of this Revuelto, an S, an SVJ, etc, 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 so it's likely to be superseded in the not too distant future, but it's likely to at least hold, or at least maintain sort of valuations for the moment. I.e., if you go out and buy one, I don't anticipate you losing a ton of money on depreciation due to the supply and demand dynamics that are going on with Lamborghini at the moment. Now in terms of the design, I don't hate it, but again, a lot of this will depend on personal taste. The front is slightly reminiscent of the Cyan. I don't dislike the front, however it is a little bit busier than the Aventador, and I'm not sure I actually prefer the new one versus the old one. I think I preferred the Aventador side profile, but maybe I just need to get used to it. The Aventador side profile looked a little bit cleaner to me, whereas the Revuelto sometimes reminds me a little bit of a C8, although maybe that's being a little bit unfair to it. I think I prefer the rear of the Revuelto to the Aventador, but again, a lot of this will depend on personal preferences. I think the rear of the Revuelto actually looks a little bit cleaner, a little bit more put together than the Aventador iterations did. From the top down, I also prefer the Revuelto, but again, a lot of that will depend on personal taste. On the inside, well, a lot of this will depend on how you specify it. In the Classica iteration, I think I prefer the Revuelto. It looks a little bit cleaner, a little bit less fussy, a little bit less over the top. If you do a Classica interior, I think it works quite well. Some of the other interiors look a little bit too busy to me. I also don't really like the steering wheel, which looks like it has various things going on. It looks busy, it looks over the top, and I don't really like the gauge cluster, which still reminds me a little bit too much of a computer game. I kind of preferred the older ones, and I prefer a little bit what Ferrari is doing to what Lamborghini is doing with its gauge clusters. But in any case, I think the interior is an improvement, but again, a lot of that will depend on your personal taste. If you prefer the over-the-top things, well, there are some options to achieve that. However, if you preferred a slightly more pared-back interior, well, you can do that with the Classica interior, which to my mind is a little bit of an improvement over some of their prior iterations. But again, I'm not really in love with Lamborghini interiors. I think Ferrari actually does these rather better because they look a little bit more pared back, a little bit more streamlined, and a little bit more straightforward than the Lamborghini ones, which seem to have things going everywhere, looking a little bit over the top, and I don't really like that. But in any case, it will depend a lot on personal preference. So those are my thoughts on the Revuelto, adding to the noise and the cacophony of information floating around YouTube. I'm not sure whether I've added anything to the conversation, but if you've got any thoughts about the Revuelto, or any thoughts about the lack of information in this video, let me know that in the comments below. But otherwise, thanks a lot for tuning in, don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully I see you for future videos as well.